Good afternoon and welcome to our listeners. I'm Julia Lau, editor at Fulcrum, and this is the commentary and analysis website of the ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute. I'm also a senior fellow and co-coordinator of the Indonesia Studies program. And today I'm very, very pleased to welcome two of our ISP fellows to this podcast taping. The first one is Dr. Deasy Simandjuntak, and the second one is Mr. Made Supriatma. Deasy you'll be familiar with. I've actually taped a podcast with her before, sometime last year. Dr. Simandjuntak is a political scientist and a political anthropologist. She is associate professor at the National Juncture University in Taipei and an associate fellow with us. Her PhD is from the University of Amsterdam. Deasy's research interests mainly include Southeast Asia politics and democratization, Indonesia's local and national politics, patronage, democracy, and identity politics. One of her latest publications is Disciplining the Accepted and Amputating the Deviants. That's a rather interesting first part of the title. Religious Nationalism and Segregated Citizenship in Indonesia. And this was published about 2 years ago in the Asian Journal of Law and Society. Made Supriatma is visiting research fellow with us here. He conducts research on elections, decentralization, Papua, and military politics. He's also an early warning fellow. That's the best title I've seen in a long time. With the how do you pronounce that? Scott Center for the Prevention of Genocide. This is under the U.S. Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. Made is the lead author of the Center's report on the risks of mass atrocities in West Papua. Made is also an active writer. He writes in the media in Indonesia and abroad, in big outlets like Channel News Asia, the Straits Times, South China Morning Post, the list goes on, and also various academic journals. Made studied political science at the University of Gadjah Mada in Yogyakarta, and also at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, which I've been to, which is very cold. So today, our topic is a rather weighty one, and it comes at a good time. The title we've given it is Indonesia's Democracy After 25 Years of Reformasi, Rights, Wrongs, and Reflections. And we've sort of discussed before this about the questions that we're going to talk about. And given the two of you are both Indonesians, but also longtime observers and researchers on Indonesian politics, various parts of it. As the next year's presidential and general elections approach, a lot of academics and commentators are using this chance to sort of reflect on the quarter century that has gone by after the fall of Suharto. And now that PDIP, the Indonesian Democratic Party of Struggle, has just announced that it will back Ganjar Pranowo, Central Java governor, for its preferred presidential candidate. We'll start with this sort of, I hope it's a gentle question. How do you see the election shaping up? What are your initial assessments of the work that the three frontrunners, who are Prabowo Subianto, who's defense minister, Ganjar himself, whom I've just named, and Anies Baswedan, who's the former Jakarta governor. What do you think the work is that they have ahead of them at this point? So I'll invite Made to speak first, and then Deasy. So go ahead, Made.
Thank you very much, Julia. Yeah, this is it's a very interesting time for Indonesian politics, actually. Right now, as you say, that we have three candidates, three frontrunners, with a different ideological background. And I think at this stage, there's two things will happen in Jakarta, actually, among the elites. One is the coalition building. Means that who will ally with who, against whom. That's the most important thing. And also the second thing is the role of Jokowi, President Jokowi. He tried to be a kingmaker to shape the race, and we don't know yet whether he will succeed or not. And it depends on the results. I think it will be determined how his life in the post presidency, whether he will go away quietly like SBY, or he will just still try to insert himself in the national politics. I think these three candidates, they have coming, as I said, that are from three different backgrounds. Prabowo Subianto, I think it's the only one who hasn't yet, to announce. He already, I mean that back or declare himself as a presidential candidate. He had a coalition, his party, Gerindra and PKB, mostly traditional Muslim political party. But there's no agreement yet on who will be the number one in this coalition. Koalisi Kebangkitan Indonesia Raya. That's what the coalition called. Because Muhaimin also, the leader of PKB, also wants to be the presidential candidate. So a lot of things is still in shape right now. Ganjar Pranowo, I think he was endorsed by PDIP and PPP, a small Islamic parties, and Anies Baswedan supported by Nasdem, PKS, the Islamist party, and Democrat Party. So there's always as in Indonesian politics in general, there's always a mix between Nationalist Party and Islamic Party. So in Anies, you have Democrat, which is a nationalist. In in Prabowo camps, you have PKB, which is a Muslim, and in Ganjar, you have PPP, who are Muslim, allied with PDIP, which is a nationalist. We don't know yet. President Jokowi tried to create what's called a grand coalition among Prabowo's camp and Ganjar's camp. But I think lately, especially after the World Cup, U20 World Cup debacles, when Ganjar against the Israeli team to play in Indonesia, that's a big problem.
And maybe I'll interject here to explain to the listeners who may not know about the U20 issue. So sort of March into April, there was some domestic rumblings when the Israeli youth team was supposed to come to Bali to play soccer, basically. But FIFA was compelled to withdraw Indonesia's hosting rights because several politicians, not just Ganjar Pranowo, but Ganjar was probably one of the most prominent ones, together with the Bali governor, both spoke up against the Israeli youth athletes coming to Indonesia to play in soccer stadiums on the ground. And that led to the huge anger and disappointment of multiple Indonesian soccer fans, let's put it that way. And the sort of, and we'll come back to this issue, but I think one of the things you keep hearing people say is Indonesian voters have very short memories. So the optimistic ones are saying, oh, never mind, by the time next year comes around, nobody will remember this soccer issue. But the other sort of political part of it is, I think a lot of people looked at what Ganjar was doing and sort of concluded, rightly or wrongly, that this was something he was sort of made or compelled to do because of instructions from higher up in his party. Right? So maybe he won't be blamed or won't suffer for it maybe in the voting. Wait, let you get back to your answer.
That's the tournament also will play in Solo, which is part of Central Java. So that's the reason why Ganjar objected the Israeli team. And then I think right now the situation is very fluid, and for several times Jokowi invited this so-called grand coalition to talk. I think lately last week he invited the five parties except Nasdem, the political party who endorses government, but they don't have any agreement on who will be the only one presidential candidate. And Prabowo, of course, because he saw his number is going up, he has the momentum right now, and he feels that his political party also is getting what is that? Is getting stronger each day. I think that's why in his calculation that he has to be the number one, and PDIP, of course, because it is the biggest party, they don't want to back off. They want their presidential candidates. That's left with Anies Baswedan. I think yesterday it's quite surprising. There's a interview by CNN with what's that, Suryapalo, the chairman of NASDEM, which is very clear to say that his relationship with President Jokowi right now is at worst. So he said beyond repair. So minus that what he said. So I think Anies Baswedan, that what people afraid of Nasdem will what is that stay away from him. But lately Nasdem say that they will stick with Anies Baswedan. So most likely we will have 3 candidates for next week.
Right. 3 horse race.
Yeah, 3 horse race.
But Deasy, do you have any different approach to answering the question? Probably, I suppose.
Thank you, Julia. It's it's a like what Mas Made has just said just now. This is a very interesting period in the Indonesian electoral politics in general, because this is the time where the coalitions are being formed, and of course in Indonesia, you know that the coalitions are actually formed around the candidates that would like to would endorse, right? So maybe if there is something that I don't agree with Mas Made about, would be the role of ideology in Indonesian politics, because I think, remember, ideology is something that the parties kind of claim to have, but in practice, ideology does not really determine which coalition they're going to form with which party, right? So if you look at Indonesian politics as polarized or as binary, then there are just 2 extremes here, and these are not ideological. These are just about whether the party belongs to the government camp or not. So that's just it. And Julia, you mentioned these 3 front runners, right? Ganjar and Prabowo and Anies Baswedan. So basically, number 1 and number 2 have already been officially endorsed by 2 extreme in the Indonesian political spectrum. So the first one, Ganjar, by the government camp, and the third one, which is Dr. Anies Baswedan, is endorsed by a coalition of the opposition party, right? The PKS and the Democrats, who are always in the opposition camp. And there is this one interesting party, NASDEM, who used to belong in the government camp, but has since left it when it decided to endorse Anies. So 2 extreme camps already have their men, right? Their candidates. That leaves us Prabowo, and he is in the middle, somehow in the middle, but more towards the government side, because he is the Minister of Defense of Indonesia. So he has a relations that is not estranged, with the president. So he has a close relation with the president. But as always, Prabowo is very flexible. He can also mobilize on the opposition. So, for example, if there is a 3-horse race here, right? If there is a 3-horse race here, this is a precarious strategy for the incumbent or the government camp, because looking at how popular they are, right? All these survey polls saying that they're very popular. The first round in Indonesia Indonesia has a 2-round majoritarian system, right? So the first round, there will likely be no clear winner. So there's no 50% plus one yet, right? So the winner has to have a 50% plus one votes. So the first round will be, there will be two winners, right? The one with the highest votes. If the two winners would be Prabowo and Ganjar, then it's likely that in the second round, Ganjar would lose, because the former supporters of what's his name, Anies, will then vote for Prabowo, because Prabowo, Prabowo would then represent anything that is not Jokowi, right? And he did, right? In 2019, he was a very fierce contender of President Jokowi back then, and there was a bitter sectarian sentiment as well, that is being mobilized. So I don't think, I don't think a three-horse race would be good for the incumbent. That's why the whole thing with the Grand Coalition is happening, because then Jokowi would be interested in making Prabowo a VP candidate for Ganjar, so that they're both together, the people who are basically in the same quadrant, in the same kind of camp together, and make it, polarized, and maybe, if it's a polarized politics again, we are looking at the same kind of binary politics with the political cleavage that is inflamed by religious sentiments, like in 2019. That's what I think.
So I'm going to just step in here and sort of explain a little bit for people who may not be as familiar about the way Indonesia elects its president. So like Dr. Simandjuntak was saying, it's a possible two-round presidential race, meaning on Valentine's Day next year, Indonesians will all go to the polls to directly elect their presidential candidate. However, in the event of a three-horse race or a three-candidate race, the understanding at this point, at least, given the way the popularity ratings are that Mas Made mentioned, each person who is one of the top three frontrunners now doesn't get anywhere close to even 30% of the popular vote in terms of their electabilitas or electability ratings. So if each person only gets about 27 or 28% of the votes, it literally means the vote is split three ways. So no single candidate wins 50% plus one vote, which is what you need to win outright the first round of presidential elections. In that case, then Indonesia will go to the polls again for what we call a second round or second runoff or first runoff for the presidential election, and that will be in a two-round presidential race. And it's exhausting, it's expensive. All kinds of other issues come up, like security of the elections. But I think the danger that Deasy was highlighting was there is a danger then that to win the vote, that some candidates may resort to more drastic measures like using identity politics or calling up, certain reserves, but fighting the war of battle in a more ideological fashion. So in some ways, you're saying there is ideology because there is still that sort of secularist or nationalist versus Islamist. But I think, would it be fairer to say all three candidates right now, Anies, Ganjar, and Prabowo, to different degrees, are still not using that Islamist? Ganjar won't, because he's with in that sort of
program. Not yet.
Oh, are we there?
He will. He will. If it is necessary, he will. That's for sure.
Benar, okay, maybe. We can. I guess it's early days yet. Huh? It's only May, and there's another 4 to 6 months to go before they actually announce their running mates. And I think that's why the money now is on who will be their running mates.
Sure, yeah.
To back up a little bit more, and sort of Deasy hinted at this at the end, do either of you think there's any chance Prabowo will sit down and go, okay, never mind, I won't run for president, I'll settle to be Ganjar's vice presidential running mate? Do you think that's at all a possibility? After all, he will have run unsuccessfully for president. He's the only one of the three who's tried and failed.
4 times.
Yeah, he'll be a 4th-time failure if he does that. But do you think before the race even gets going, he will ever sit down and think, I'll throw my hat only in as VP, not as P to Ganjar? I can't see him settling for that.
Mas Made would like to.
It's a
I don't
difficult
think so.
one.
I don't think so. He's a very ambitious man.
Right.
But the other factors is that he got a momentum right now.
Yeah.
Interestingly, I think the other day I talked to our colleague
Yeah.
at ISEAS, and I said that one of the strategy of Prabowo is just keep quiet.
Right.
Let Anies and Ganjar bicker with each other. And just keep quiet, keep working on mobilizing. And a few days ago, I saw an analysis of media, the mention of the mainstream media and the social media, and how Prabowo, what is that, the hashtag of Prabowo has become popular, which is the hashtag is that ikut Pak D, which means as a follow Jokowi, and then Prabowo bersama Jokowi, Prabowo and Jokowi, that's together. So he tied himself closely with Jokowi, and Jokowi knew this very well, and then he played the game with PDIP. His arch enemy, actually. So Mega and Megawati, the chairwoman of the PDIP, and Joko Widodo always have an easy relationship. I think they have a marriage of convenience, supporting each other, but they are not personally. They are not really very close, and I think they are trying to compete with each other. And Jokowi knows this, and at one point he seems to show his support to Ganjar, but at the same time he also flirting with Prabowo.
Yeah.
So this is very interesting, and I don't know where this had to, and I think the result, whether Jokowi has to say, can convince. Of course, I heard that so many times Jokowi tried to convince Prabowo, you have to number two, and Ganjar should be number one. And also he said that, well, you're not in a good health after 2 times stroke, and you are old enough, so let's give it the baton to younger generation. But apparently, I think each day, Prabowo, become more convinced that he has a chance now, by being quiet. So that's very ironical, but at the same time, well, that's politics. So
I think it's true in any 3-horse race.
Yeah.
In a way, you let the top 2 fight it out, and then you step back, and then you just up whatever's left, possibly.
Right.
Do you have a Deasy, do you have a different view or a different read of it?
Whether Prabowo would settle to be
VP,
already?
whether he might.
It would be. I mean, I agree with Mas Made. It would be really difficult for him to convince him that it's
Right.
that it's okay to be a VP candidate of another candidate. But as we know that he has tried to be president, maybe like 3 times, twice to be president and 1 to be VP, right?
Yes.
VP of Megawati.
Yes.
Remember that he actually ran with Megawati as a VP. So he did it before, right? So if we look at, I mean, his ambition, to be in the top leadership of Indonesia, then perhaps with some calculations, he would be willing to be a VP of somebody, because then it will be a different kind of government, right? A government that in which the VP might have a bit more power, than usual.
Right.
Yeah.
It could be a deal that he strikes with the front runner candidate to be.
Yeah, then that would be more of a distribution of task instead of the president does everything and the vice president is just in the corner not doing anything. So it would be.
That's actually a good place to sort of jump to the next question. Do you think it's still like that? Do you think in Indonesian politics and democracy today, it is still sort of mainly the president that pushes things through, and the VP is sort of like an extra in a show?
Well, Jokowi's first tenure was more of a distribution of task.
Right.
But second tenure, I think it's more Jokowi. It's more Jokowi.
And maybe that's natural, right? As you get more confident in your second term as president, since it's the last term as well, that you sort of pick up speed and do what you think you want your legacy to be, rather than letting your VP take the spotlight. Just in case.
But I think with Prabowo, probably, if you that's a speculation. I heard this. It is unconfirmed, but I think the idea is very interesting. What if giving Prabowo vice presidency, and at the same time he also becomes the Minister of Defense? So he's in control with the military, and it's a very, very powerful, but also dangerous for this country.
Sure. Yeah.
Do you think then, sort of today, 25 years after 1998, Indonesian politics are sort of destined to be more divisive, more split, because these fissures, if you will, haven't been healed? Because essentially that divide you talk about, the Islamists versus secularists, even people looking at Indonesian politics, 30, 40 years ago would have said similar things, right? That is what the fight is about. Do you think that's still the same fight? Is it now different? Is it a sometimes younger generation versus older generation fight?
Me?
Anyone?
Deasy first.
Mas Made is
whether Indonesia's politics is more divisive today than in 1998, I mean...
Or you can even, I know you teach younger students and grad students, some of whom are Indonesians. What do you hear from your students, maybe, for, who are, what do they want to see, for instance? And I always wonder this, because if you have a 70-plus-year-old possibly running for president, a bit like Biden in the US, and in other countries, there are even older politicians running for president, would the young people looking at the situation like that go, why are we still letting, people of this age, even though that's an ageist statement, when there are younger leaders, right? Shouldn't we let the younger leaders have a chance? That's one possible way to answer the question. But I think my question was more broadly, are Indonesia's politics and society today more divided? Or has time let some of that heal post 1998?
Right.
Prabowo as a candidate is interesting because it almost seems to me sometimes that there's a bit of amnesia going on.
Yeah.
Because he's been around for a long, long time. Back then, he was a military commander. He was the son-in-law of Suharto. So he had a certain status, and he came with a certain background. He's managed to actually, in a way, change his image, right? So is he still the same person? That's the sort of difficult question to answer. But by voting him in as president, are we going backwards or are we moving forward? I guess and that's a question I will only leave to Indonesians to answer. I don't feel qualified to answer that.
I think I mean, touching upon the youth aspect, right? I would be one of those that would be a bit pessimistic about Indonesian young people having their own voice or anything. We saw PSI, right? Partai Solidaritas Indonesia, Indonesia Solidarity Party. It was all just it was hyped up, and they call each other bro and sis, and really just kind of portraying this kind of youth aura. But in the end, it was very, very urban based, right? And then we forget that young people exist also in outer islands, like in islands that are or non-Java regions. And non-Java regions, even in the Java regions, in the villages, young people a lot of them still vote conservatively, voting for old parties, established parties, and not, party that represent or claim to represent youth voices. So if there is a divisiveness, maybe the division or the divisiveness is not about age, I think.
When you say they vote conservatively, do you mean they vote with their parents, or do you think they vote with
Perhaps
telling them how to vote, or they vote with the village, or they vote with friends?
I think with their parents is possible, but of course then social media has a lot to do with their political preference, right? So if there is anything youthy, the youth aspect play a role in Indonesia, it would be like the usage of social media, right? That is accessible to more young people than maybe more than 55-year-old people, right? So that in that way, then divisiveness would be strengthened, or would be made rampant by social media. But whether or not Indonesia's politics is more divisive today than 1998, I think the divisiveness in current politics is more during politically sensitive periods such as election, right? So you can see how the what is that? I kept thinking that the Chinese word for it.
Chinese word is well, noisy or chaotic.
The noisy, yes. Yeah. So the political noisiness, it's just it goes up every 5 years, right? So we saw how, in 2019 the society was so divided into two camps. The political cleavage was religion, or rather religiosity. In fact, it was very religiously divisive, that the whole campaign period was devoid of any substantial discourse on anything important, like good governance or clean governance or rule of law. Everything was about religion, and it was so bitter, right, back in 2019. But then everything gradually just kind of abated. And then it was just politics as usual, just the normal kind of patron-client relationship and corruption and anything, in that way. And then now 2023, 2024, we will see again, this divisiveness going up. So this division, or this polarization in Indonesia's politics is not as in the US, right? So because theirs is very ideology. That's why I said in the beginning that it is not about ideology, because in the US it is about ideology. There is no space for a third alternative. It is Democrats or Republicans. In Indonesia, it's not like that. You can one day become a Republican, but then the next day your party join the government, and become a Democrat, things like that. So it's all very fluid. It's all it's divisive, but in a very superficial way. It's not ideological. That's what I'm saying. So whether it is now more divisive than 1998, well, every 5 years it's divisive. So
maybe if it's just around the time of elections, you can argue that it's just letting out, letting out the pressure. And if it calms down after the elections and everyone works together again, arguably then it's less divisive.
Then the power constellation will play, right? And then then different parties will decide, oh, I actually belong here and not that, and just and then completely forget all this bitter religious mobilization that has to happen.
The fact that they can talk about a grand coalition suggests there is then very little. I mean, and Max Lane has a similar argument, which is, among the major parties, the 7 parties that are in parliament, they don't actually have, his argument is, they don't actually have ideological differences. Everyone is really about, do I get power? Can I dispense power and benefits to the people who are supporting me? And his argument is, other than Partai Buruh, the Labour Party, who's singing a different tune. His argument is all the other major parties are sort of doing the same thing. Yeah,
even Partai Buruh now. I think Pak Max a little bit. I think you have to wait to the rest. Well, that article was before what said the Partai Buruh endorsed Ganjar Pranowo as their presidential candidate.
Yeah.
So even Partai Buruh are tempted to play that kind of game.
Yeah.
It's I think it's become the iron law of Indonesian politics that you have to be in power in order to develop your party in order to get strength. So in my view, after a long time of watching Indonesian politics, I think all of Indonesian politics is all about elite. Yeah, elites will determine and what is that negotiation among them. Even if you are losing and the losing side, you will still have a prize. You will never. It's never zero-sum game.
Right.
So divisiveness, I think it is important. But also remember that if you look at the 1950, the results of the election, the ideological polarization, it's quite resistance. Even until now, you go to Sumatera Barat, they will never vote for PDIP. Also in what is the sphere of influence of Sumatera Barat, like Riau, Jambi, Palembang. Palembang is a little bit, and also Aceh. I think outer island, mostly what's that, in Masyumi areas, they used to be Masyumi areas. It's very, very persistent. The ideology is still there. And it's coming out every 5 years. And other than that, elite will, go to Jakarta and then negotiate who gets what. Even if I lose in the losing side, I will still have, I need coal mining in that region. That will be mine. And then, people in power say that, we'll give you, but just keep quiet for a while. So, that kind of things. I don't know whether it is bad or it is good, because I also living in two. Basically, it's two countries. I'm watching and reading American politics every day, so I saw that kind of things too. I think in certain degrees, it's in Indonesia, even though we ideologically we don't have any ideological program. That's true in what makes a sense. That we don't have a ideological program, ideological what is that? Ideological program. That's I think probably the right word. What I mean is that what about the fiscal responsibility? For example, every party has similar platform. What about development? I think in Indonesia right now, there's a consensus that we all have to have a development. We all have to have growth, economic growth, for example. Right. So that kind of thing, I think it's become very clear. And this is the domain of the elites, not the masses. And I don't know whether this is, again, I don't know whether this is good or not, but divisiveness is there. Yeah. But it always be there. And I think I'm just like in economy, more competition is good. Politics is divisive, is good. Yeah, you have to be. It's supposed to be like that. If not, then you will go back to new order. So yeah.
Well, maybe now I will ask the last question, and you can answer it very briefly if you want. 25 years after Suharto, do you think Indonesia is a democracy? This question is harder than it sounds.
Yeah, it's what do you think, Des?
I suppose you can answer. You can qualify your answer and say, "I'm answering as an Indonesian," or you can say, "I'm answering as an academic," or you can say,
After 25 years reform, right? I know this is interesting. While I do agree with you know, the trend in the world, right? The global trend is democratic decline,
yes.
also globally and regionally. So almost every country is undergoing you know, democratic decline, even the most mature democracies in the world.
Yeah.
So Indonesia is not a special case. Yeah, so I do agree that Indonesia has is facing a lot of democratic challenges, but it's also very interesting that that there is a discrepancy between the fact that Indonesia has these challenges and survey polls that show that Indonesians still believe in the government and the kind of democracy that the government offers, right? So, I mean, okay, I'm just gonna go through maybe some of the challenges, right? So that we can understand in which aspects are Indonesia as a country is facing challenges. So, for example, you know, the weakening of the anti-corruption efforts, right? There is this new kind of position of the KPK, which is not as independent as before. There is a shrinkage of the opposition voices, right? Because the executive branch is more powerful and getting more powerful and more powerful, and they somehow co-opted the parliament or the legislative branch, and so then there is this problem in the checks and balances mechanism that is supposed to be very important for democracy. Other things, you know, such as civil liberties wise, we have impediment to the freedom of speech based on controversial laws, you know, the ITE law, and we know that, you know, in practice it is anti-defamation law. You know, it's not about protecting transaction and what is that?
Communications and
Yes. So it has diverted from its you know, original aim. Also, the impediment to freedom of religion, we still have anti-blasphemy law. We have this law that impede or limits the minorities' right to build worship places. We have different we have dynastic politics that are rampant, that is rampant and getting even more rampant at the national level. So we have all of this, but at the same time, the survey of public opinions, we know the ISEAS survey, right? What is that? 2022. It highlights that the public are still very satisfied with the president. Maybe not quite satisfied with the
70+% ratings are very
72%. And Compass also said it is around 69.3%, which is a good number. And a majority of Indonesians are still believe in democracy. So then why, you know, what accounts for this discrepancy, right? What causes this discrepancy? So I was just thinking about it and I agree with some of the scholars that said Indonesians look at democracy differently. So the way they see whether democracy works or not is by looking at government's performance, whether the government can fulfill, you know, their policy aims, right? So and it has something to do with the social welfare aspects, infrastructure development aspects, redistributive policies aspects. So whether regions outside of the central state, the regions also can get, economic development. So whether there is some sort of an equality, more than democracy in a more liberal sense, like civic liberties, political liberties. So more than that. So, in that way, I think in these aspects, this kind of more social welfare aspects or economic aspects, up and the kind of democracy that Indonesia has still works for them. So you see the discrepancy, right? I mean, the Freedom House Index, we go down from 69 to 59 in 2022. The Economist Index also is just flat, 6.71 out of 10. So, but at the same time, people are quite satisfied. So yeah, so that's the thing. I mean, 25 years of reform, we still have this kind of different idea of what democracy means. And if there is something that the next government has to kind of pay attention to, is this fulfillment of real, substantive democracy. So it's no longer electoral democracy. Electorally, Indonesia is a poster child for democracy, right? Right, in Southeast Asia.
It's not a, it's a accomplishment to be proud of, that you can have peaceful elections, not violent elections, and directly elect your president, and you've done it 4 times successfully, and now you're going to the 5th time.
Free and fair.
Right. 25 years ago, I don't think anyone would have said, yeah, of course, Indonesia.
Right. And that election is still used as a mechanism for power succession. Which is, I mean, some countries in Southeast Asia, they keep getting, other mechanisms.
But the ASEAN summit's going on right now, and we'll wait to hear interesting things about those other non-democratic countries.
Yes, right. So
I'll have to stop you there and let Made have a quick answer, and we'll have to, unfortunately, close. But Mas Made, you can have the last word.
No, I think, I agree with Deasy. How can I say? The quality of a democracy, our democracy in Indonesia, is regressing. That for sure. No doubt about that. It's harder to have a voice right now. It's harder to build, to mobilize, to organize, to voice dissent, for example. So, but at the same time, I'm a little bit quite optimistic about this. I see democracy in Indonesia is asymmetrical. It's not just, if you look at the democracy, is not not only at the national level, but also at the regional level.
Yes.
So I think as a political scientist, I think I'm really tempted to make there's a lot of things you need to work on, like making a comparison between regions, between districts or cities in Indonesia. And in my data, I think if you're not accomplish your mission, so what you pledged during your campaign, and then you will not be re-elected.
Yeah.
That's in it. I think that's one indicator. It's a good indicator to see whether democracy is working or not. And I think in some regions they have a good economic growth, a very responsible governance, a very good social service, and etc. But some regions are really, really bad. Just like in Lampung recently, I think there's a Julia, one region, one young man wrote on TikTok about the condition of the road in Lampung.
That's right.
And I think the President Jokowi tried to score point by making it a political issue in Japanese way. But that is possible if you are not doing your job. And then people start criticizing you, and that's okay. What's not democratic about that actually? But at some point in the national level, we really see everything is degrading. Elite has more unity right now. With their unity, they have more power. So I think that the best thing about Jokowi is that he unites the elites more than any other politicians. So yeah, I think he has the power that I think I will give a credit to President Jokowi that he has accomplished what Suharto did in 32 years without guns. So that's a good thing about him, even though he act like Suharto. So yeah, because the quality is not really good, and he's okay with that. I think we will see his successor, whether the successor almost certainly he either Ganjar Anies or Prabowo, his successor will be able to unite the elites like him. So keep them quiet and give them whatever they want. But he's still doing the work for the people. It's not nice, but it works. This recipe is work. And I think in terms of political identity, I would say Jokowi is the best player in this. It's not Anies Baswedan. He's very good at dividing the electorate, and he knows what he's doing, and he defined his opponents. He defines Prabowo, who never go to mosque, who never goes to Friday prayer, and know nothing about Islam, as Islamic extremist. Who does that? Who did that? Jokowi. So it's very good playing identity politics without being seen as playing it. That's a good things about this man, about this politician.
That's an interesting take on it, and not necessarily a democratic explanation, but unfortunately we have to stop here. But thank you both very much for today.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you,
The
Deasy.
past 45 minutes with me. We'll have another podcast hopefully next year about all these issues, and to see what happens next and who comes after Jokowi. But I wish you both happy election watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a very good one.
Yeah, it will be fun. So that was sure.
Officially say goodbye to our listeners.
Okay.
So, thank you.
Thank you very much.